musician, composer, maker of artful videos, producer of installations, inventor of musical machines, software programmer, producer of synthesizer modules, studio owner. The Scottish artist Lomond Campbell doesn't recognize any borders nor limitations in art. His music covers the whole spectrum from easygoing to danceable to ambient to symphonic, even to experimental sometimes. But even the most, consumer-friendly pieces of his works bear witness of the depth of his thinking about music and about art in general. His studio, he called it The Length, is not only an inspiring place for producing music, but also a haven of cross-genre creativity. Lomond's installations and musical machines reflect his seemingly never-ending search for new relationships between the artist and his productions, while at the same time being of real practical use in the process of making music. And here he is, Lomond Campbell. Good morning to Scotland.
Hi, how you doing, man? It's sorry, I'm a bit a bit of a Skype amateur, so that's why I missed the call.
No problem. I've been looking forward a lot, I have to say, to meeting you at least here on Skype.
Yeah, likewise. Your questions are fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the first impression when I prepared for this interview was, hey, I'm going to talk to a Renaissance man.
Well, it's very kind of you.
No, so many things we are doing. Great.
Jack of all trades, like a handyman. You know, do you have that over there, like a handyman sort of? Somebody that can just do everything, but not very well.
Okay. Well, okay, let's not talk about well or not well, because it's always hard to. Well, all right. Are you looking forward to a busy weekend or a more relaxed one?
This weekend, I'm working on a printmaking project just now, so a kind of visual art project.
Yeah.
A little busy.
Oh, okay. Sounds. I don't know whether it sounds good or not. That's on you.
We'll see. It's kind of new to me, so it's we'll see how good it is. Yeah. Whereabouts are you? Is it the Czech Republic?
Yeah, Czech Republic. I'm in the western part of the Czech Republic. It's this small town called Karlovy Vary. It's in the corner between the German and the Austrian border.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
nice. Nice. I took a train from Budapest to Berlin once, and it maybe went through that kind of area.
This the area. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think you went through Ústí nad Labem. That's normally the knot for the trains there. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's a dead kind of region here. It's nice nature, nice buildings. Even a few people are living here, but it's ideal for doing, let's say, art in your studio, because no one is going to disturb you here because no one is there.
Really. It's kind of, I tell you what, it's kind of similar up here. I have to say, up in the Highlands of Scotland. It's same kind of vibe.
I see. All right, let's jump into our matter. The first thing what I'd like to ask you is, doing so many and different things, making music, making videos, making installations, sonic installation and other ones, making software, producing things. How is it possible to, let's say, to stay, not to go insane?
It's difficult. I mean, I don't find working across different disciplines in itself challenging. Other than, learning new skills, but I think organizationally it's very difficult, and I don't keep on top of things, and I never feel like I'm doing the right thing or applying myself to the right thing at the right time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I'm kind of browbeaten a lot of the time because I'm constantly thinking, I should be working on something else, or if I'm not working on music, I feel guilty about not working on music, or and then when I'm working on music, especially a big project, you feel like you're not paying enough attention to whatever it might be, visual art or video or, building something. And, it's this constant cycle of you don't quite feel like you're doing the thing you should be doing. You never feel like you're where you're meant to be. But other than that kind of weird guilt trip, that kind of personal guilt trip, I do find it relatively easy to jump between different disciplines, because I think the sort of main thrust of any discipline is just ideas, really, and you jump from specialism to specialism with ideas, so you just apply the same thing. That doesn't really matter if it's music, if it's sound, if it's digital, if it's analog. You're just applying what you know about creativity to each sort of language, if you want.
I see. I don't get it completely. What do you mean with the same thing? For example, let's say your machines and your music. What is the same thing in both?
Well, I guess if I want to do an album, say for example, then to me there's usually going to have to be a concept behind that album or a reason for doing an album. And if I want to build an installation, then there has to be a reason for doing it. And if I want to build an instrument, there has to be a valid reason. I have to want to do it. There has to be a sort of inquiry, a line of inquiry. And so that's kind of what I mean. It doesn't really matter what discipline it is that I'm working in. I have the same approach to it. So in that sense, I don't see the difference, if you like. I don't really mind what I'm working on, as long as I'm getting to a conclusion, sort of creatively or conceptually, as long as I'm arriving to the sort of conclusion that I want to get to.
I see. So what is it more? Is it more the urge to start doing something, not something new, but something different from what you have done, let's say, the last weeks? Or is it an idea what is not possible to realize in the field you are working right on, so you have to do something else? You have to say, this idea I can realize only in a machine or only in an installation, and so I have to change from, let's say, producing an album to making installation? Or is it just the urge to say, I'm fed off, I don't want to produce music at the moment, I'd rather go and make an installation, I have some nice ideas? What is it more?
It's a bit of both, and also a bit of kind of opportunism. So if there's an opportunity to do something, it might be like that I've been asked by somebody to do something, I've been commissioned, or there might be a particular opportunity that I'll apply for. It might be something like that. It might be an exhibition that I'm wanting to do, or so. In some ways, I'll want to do stuff myself. I'll be self-directed because, for example, I'll say, wouldn't it be great to build a machine that uses pendulums to make music and do drawings, and then I'll do that. Or wouldn't it be amazing to do an album about the crisis in Ukraine or something like that? I'll then just go and do that. So yeah, it might be that I want to do something, or it might be that somebody will come to me and say, hey, could you build a tape looping device for me to then go on tour with or make an album with? That'll take me off in that direction. So it's just a bit of both, really. I just kind of see what's coming, and I try and kind of navigate my way through life the same way a lot of people do, and just trying to earn money when you need it and take the jobs that you need to take when that's what's required, and somehow I kind of weave my way through life that way. And maybe I should sit down and go, you know what, I should just concentrate on being a music producer. And then maybe I'd actually get good at it, if I spent enough time doing it. Or I should just be a carpenter, or I should just be a welder, I don't know. It's never worked that way for me, and I don't think it ever will. So I guess I just have to go with my lot.
Okay. Yeah. Would your music be different if you were not, for example, making installations or making software? Would your music be different then?
Yeah, I think it would, Rolf, because I mean, I don't know how many sort of albums you know of mine, but say, for example, Loop, which is my third most recent album, that came about because I was invited to make an instrument for a friend, and the entire album is just me testing the instrument before I gave it to him. So it's not particularly something I would have sat down to create if I hadn't been in that situation where I've been asked to make this unique instrument for somebody. I didn't know I was making an album. I was just recording the sound of the machine to see how it worked.
Oh, yeah.
So that dictated that album almost in its entirety. It wasn't something I sat down and said, I want to create an album that's paced like this, or that has this kind of palette, or has this kind of color or feel to it, or mood. It's just how it came out. So yeah, if I wasn't doing that, I probably would be sort of a bit more predetermined in a way. Like I would have an idea of I want my music to go, and how I want one album to flow into the next. But because I'm kind of jumping from project to project in this way, I guess it sort of determines what the sound is in some ways.
I see. I think we'll come back to this aspect a little bit later. First, I'd like to talk about the Unsung machine.
Yeah, sure.
Great. I have to say, personally, I'm very critical about using texts in music.
Why is that?
Because only rarely I come upon pieces of let's say sonic art or music, or as you like to call it, where text and music have, let's say, the same weight, the same quality, and not one is just the servant of another one. And I'm not talking about simple and pop songs and shit like that. Okay, there are also nice pop songs, by the way, but not, anyway. So I think it's nearly impossible. I'm trying this right now with the production of an album, but it's anyway. I think it's nearly impossible to have both kinds of art giving them the same weight, the same importance in a piece. And so I like yeah, great. Yeah, nice. Yeah.
You're gonna behave. Yeah.
So I was fascinated by the name, the Unsung machine. May I ask you to tell us a little bit more about how it occurs, the idea, what's all about it?
Well, similarly, I mean, I sort of come actually from more of a songwriting background. I used to write songs and make more, I guess, more conventional music, if you want to sort of be kind of broad about it. But I sort of just ran out of things to write about. You know, I would write lyrics, I would write songs, and I just kind of lost the urge. But at the same time, I still think language is pretty fascinating. Like I used to work in a linguistics department for the University of Edinburgh, and I worked there for a long time. Actually, I worked there for 9 years, and it was an incredible place to work because you sort of learned about language almost through osmosis, just by being around academics who were studying syntax and phonetics and phonology. So, you know, it was a really interesting place to be. I was a sound technician, so that's where I sort of picked up some of my skill set, electronics and fixing tape decks and things like that. That's where they had a great archive of equipment, and that's where I kind of got into using archaic equipment and old formats and stuff like that. But to come back to the original point, I wanted to use language in music, but I mean, you actually summed it up quite succinctly. I wanted to use language on a level playing field. So I wanted it to be incorporated into music, but I didn't want it to be front and center, and I didn't want to be a sonic backdrop for someone telling a story, or like a spoken word piece or a piece of poetry or a song. Didn't want the music to be that. I wanted it to be a different relationship. I wanted it to be an unusual relationship. So I was working with a friend of mine's who's an amazing, he's really great modular synthesist and academic called Simon Kirby. And we were speaking a little bit about how we could go about this. And so it was both of us who sort of came up with this concept of just using words and attributing a kind of value to each letter. And then really, it's a really simple idea, and just letting that value determine music through patching, so essentially through programming and applying the value to whatever synthesizer you want to use. So it's actually, technically, it's not super complicated. It's basically, the Unsung machine is basically a MIDI controller. It's a kind of very sort of elaborate, over-engineered MIDI controller. But conceptually, it's way more than that, because you're not just setting the value of faders. You're entering words, and words have meaning attached to them by their very nature. So I just really liked the idea, and I started playing around with it, and I found it incredibly playable as well. So it was just a nice way to bring some kind of chance determination into composition, and just explore further how you could exploit modular synthesis, the open network of modular synthesis, and other synthesizers. I mean, a lot of standalone synthesizers now have a really kind of modular ethos about them, that they're kind of modular in a way, even though you don't patch anything. So yeah, just basically using synthesizers with a master, a global controller that is words. You need to feed it with words.
I see. There's perhaps not a similar, well, yes, a similar idea. That's on the other side of the border, or on the other side of the river, not between music and words and linguistic, but between music and mathematics and numbers, Fibonacci numbers and things like that. I have read about. Interesting. So a little bit more, please, about the internal meaning of words in terms of music. You talked about this translational thing. Yeah. So how does it translate?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Yeah. In simple words, how does let's say the dialed-in word translate to music? Is there some algorithm which gives it an inner meaning, a stronger meaning, or is it just chance?
Well, it's if I was to break it down, each wheel has got letters on it, and each letter has a different MIDI CC value. So it's essentially that. It's an ever randomized, just by the nature of the combination of letters and then the combination of words. So if you think of words as being kind of atomic, and then the letters that make up the words as being subatomic, then it's just constant randomization. Just by using a source that's really common to us all, we can all use words. I know there's obviously language barriers, but we can all use words, and that's a really great tool for then feeding something. It's like a human way of randomizing. So yeah, I guess that's what I kind of liked about it, because I could code something up that I'm sure anybody could code something up that could randomize values in minutes. It's pretty simple. There's probably loads of devices out there that have random values, parameters built into it, but it's actually saying, well, random's great, I love random, but let's apply meaning to it. and we did it this way through the Unsung machine. So rather than just saying hit a button and it'll spew out some random numbers, let's make it more theatrical. Let's make more of it. And again, I really like the way you sort of were talking earlier about having equal weighting to things, and I just think this is a really good way of doing it. Unsung, you know, that's where the sort of term came from. Not only is it this unsung, unsaid idea, so the literal sense of the word, but also this kind of idea of secrecy almost as well, you know, kind of a clandestine, I don't know, just a kind of almost Masonic, secretive way as well. I actually tried to get people to submit secrets to me through my website, as well as like poems and things like that. So I would have material to feed into the machine. But people aren't very forthcoming about submitting secrets, even anonymously. I only got 2 secrets, and I would have loved more secrets because I think that as a concept really appeals to me. I love the idea of almost being like a confession box kind of thing. So I really like the idea of that, of offloading secrets and confessions into a machine and creating something musical and you know, possibly worthwhile with it, you know.
I see. Isn't it the opposite of playfulness?
Is it the opposite of playfulness? In what sense?
In the sense that when you have a text idea or a word idea, you just dial them in and then look what comes out. Whereas a more playful approach would be, let's just dial in something. Perhaps let's invent new words. How does a certain word which does not yet exist, sound in music and something?
You could do. I guess the thing for me is that you've got this kind of key almost, you know, you've got this thing that everybody can try because everybody shares words and we all have this kind of shared tool set almost, you know, this toolkit. So yeah, apologies.
No problem. I had 13 of these.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Well, I've got one and she's
but bobtails.
Oh really?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the machine also has 2 dials that are external, the sort of peripheral mechanisms that sort of plug into the main interface, the word interface, and it's a record and play wheel, and that adds further randomization to it. So if you've, it's kind of like a very crude store and recall mechanism. So the record wheel is constantly listening to what you're typing in and sort of copying or making a copy of what you're typing in. And the play wheel then plays that out. So you can further mess about with it. And that becomes quite playable. In fact, it's quite nice to play as a 2-person device if you have one person typing the words in. This is how I used it live. Occasionally, I would invite people up to enter words into the main part of the machine, and then I would just sort of modify it a little bit to taste and just listen to what was happening and just almost remix it, you know, remix the words.
Your machines are unique. There's always only one sample of each machine. Have you thought sometimes of, let's say, going in small series and selling them?
Yeah, so the machine Loop, which I built for my friend, when I put that online, just little videos of it and stuff, little demonstrations, I had quite a lot of interest. And I actually got, I think it was 6 or 7 commissions to build more. And to be honest, it would have made sense to do it, you know, because I'd figured it out. It's like I'm forever building prototypes, and that's the difficult bit of making something. Once you've ironed out all the creases, figured out all the the things the problems, figures your way around all the problems, it would make sense to then make a run of them, an edition, and then sell them, because it makes perfect sense. But by the time I get to the end of something, I'm wanting to do something else. I get to the end of one project and I'm thinking, yeah, okay, cool, let's go and do something else. So I did get commissioned. I didn't take any money from anybody, because I know, I'm not the most reliable in that sense. I probably wouldn't sit down and do it. But having said that, I might go back to it. I might, if I get time, I might go back and build them and get back in touch with these people. It was almost 2 years ago now. So I might get back in touch. There was some interesting people, actually. There was some producers, and there was somebody who's got quite a prominent YouTube channel, who sort of explores unusual instruments, wanted me to build him one. And I just never got around to it. There was just too many other things on the go,
I see.
But you're right. I mean, I should do that for sure.
Should. What is should? Anyway, you mentioned randomness. A very interesting aspect, especially for people who are coming from a classical musical education like me, where randomness is a sin and not... and I love randomness. I'm writing books about randomness, by the way, in music, but nevertheless. Randomness in music, okay, but what about randomness in producing music?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I just watched a video last night on YouTube of a guy who'd attempted to mix a track. He's a producer, and he'd attempted to mix a track using AI. So I think he'd applied AI EQs and whatnot and filters to a track. So it was kind of interesting. I guess it's not quite randomness, but it's creating that tension between giving up control and having control, which is the thing. I think if there was a theme to what I do, that's it. I like to explore that strange kind of no man's land between randomness or chaos and being in control. So all my pieces kind of do that, really, in some ways. But I haven't really applied it to production. If you're talking about sitting down at a computer, like a DAW, and producing a track or an album, I wouldn't say at that stage I'm that fond of randomness. That's probably the stage where I would like to rein things in. It's more in the creation, finding the spark of the idea, and maybe certain elements of the track itself, melody, rhythm, whatever kind of aspect you want. I quite like randomness there, but when it comes to producing, I quite like to be in charge and take control of it and pull it all together. So yeah, it's a good question. I mean, some albums that I've done have been just hit record, which is I know that's very modular. A lot of people will just get something going, hit record, and that can often be an album right there, I've done that with various machines. I mean, this machine behind us here, this is a harmonograph. So it's kind of an old, archaic device for illustrating mathematical harmony. And it creates these kind of drawings, these beautiful drawings of Lissajous figures. But it also has some sensors attached to it, which just simply put out gates every time the pendulum passes. So you can quite easily hook it up to your modular synthesizers, and it gives you incredible kind of phasing rhythms to work with, because the pendulums are almost the same length. Well, they are all the same length, but because of human error, they swing at slightly different sort of tempos and frequencies. So it's a kind of massive phase machine. So you can create some really interesting patterns by patching even just two gates that are just ever so slightly drifting I mean, Reich made a whole career of it, so that idea of something repetitive just really slowly drifting out and coming back in is really, really compelling. So yeah, I've made 2 albums just by hitting record and seeing what happens with that, and not doing any production really, other than just hitting record. And Loop, the album I was telling you about, which was just me testing a machine. There was no production value to that, other than getting the sound as well balanced as you can get it in the moment, and then just hitting record and recording straight to stereo, straight to 2-track. So I guess that's quite random. I guess that's like saying whatever will be, will be. I'm quite willing to let the magic happen. But there's also another side where I just really like to do the kind of intricate stuff and the fiddly stuff and sit down for hours and work on minute details of production.
Mass is it? Yeah, okay. Kind of, let's say, systematic way of masking randomness, setting borders, and in between these borders allow things to go. Yeah, I see.
My last album was done using, I think I made 144 tape loops, and they were quite short. They were all about 10 seconds, and I layered them all up, and it was a cacophonous mess. It was awful. It was essentially just white noise. But I worked subtractively from that. So I would just pick away at it. It took a long time. I would just pick away until a handful of loops were somehow weaving in and out of each other musically. And I would then write over the top of that. So it was kind of a weird subtractive process, and then dipping into layering and adding back up. And sometimes there would be just a ghost of the original tape loops. There wouldn't be even much left in the track. But the important thing to me was that I started each project with 144 tape loops, the same 144 tape loops, and broke it down until something happened. That wasn't necessarily in my head. It wasn't of my making necessarily. I wanted to try and I can't remember, what do you call it, where you record white noise and interference and sort of listen out for voices. Can you remember what that's called? Is it ESP or something like that?
I know what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a bit like that. I just wanted a noise, and then I wanted something to appear from it that almost came from nothing.
Well, it's randomness is, or the function of randomness in art. I think it's a matter for more than only one interview. Anyway, what makes you jump from one field of, let's say, human activity to another one? What makes you break the borders? Or don't you see any, perhaps?
I guess just going back to what we were talking about earlier, I don't really see borders in discipline. I mean, from a practical point of view, but I guess thematically, it's always interesting to look at how humans behave in some way. And I think I've made work for years. I used to make work in a collective, an art and music collective. And actually, we went from project to project looking at how humans behave. And we would build sound installations, and it bled into albums. And it was all about human behavior, really. So I think there's something in that about the work that I do just now. I think that's a continuation. So, as I say, I'm not sure if there's a massive difference. Maybe on a kind of practical day-to-day basis. Today I've got printmaking tools in front of me, next week I might have a mixing desk in front of me, and then I might be working at a workbench with a circular saw, you know, and a hammer. But I'm always trying to answer some kind of internal question or think about some kind of, I guess, something that's just caught my imagination or caught my attention about how we behave, how we are with each other, that kind of thing. You know, it all comes back to that, even if it's not totally apparent from what you see, you know, something like that. Even, you know, that the thing that really interested me about the harmonograph was that I was just fascinated by the idea that it was built so long ago. You know, it was invented so long ago, and if you think back to the kind of mid 1800s, we were just discovering electricity and its kind of application. We hadn't even really figured out the application of it yet, you know. So it's kind of fascinating to then take that into the future at a time when, you know, I make music using electricity. That's the kind of core juice of what I use. That's the fuel that my machines run on. And it's pretty fascinating to take something that was invented at a time when most people wouldn't have known what electricity was, and then apply that to nowadays where we don't even think about it. It's so common we don't think about it, but yet we're literally playing it. We're playing electrons, you know, we're playing that when we plug up our modular synth and turn it on. We're oscillating, we're moving electrons about. That's what's making the sound. It's kind of fascinating.
Sure. Something comes into my mind right now suddenly. Is it possible, perhaps a provocational question, is it possible at all to make really, let's say, kind of new music without a broader approach, without this broad approach?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's a weird time to be a musician.
Oh.
Because the value of music is so non-existent, you know. It's a really strange time to try and be a musician, and I might be the product of that, you know, being the age that I am and sort of coming up through the death of the music industry, or the death and resuscitation and then death again, and you know, that kind of thing. Certainly the last gold rush of the music industry is gone, so it's really difficult to make a living as a musician. And I think most of the people that I know have a really diverse way of earning money, a way of making a living. And that's possibly why I am the way I am, why I do, you know, I've built furniture in the past for people to earn money. You know, I told you I worked in a linguistics department. I was a whiskey ambassador.
Very important job.
Very important job. Very important job. Yeah, very important job.
We are not really a whiskey nation here, but I'm a whiskey lover.
Oh, really? We should have scheduled this for later in the day, and I could have shared a whiskey.
Yeah, perhaps.
So yeah, I think that's probably it. I think I've had to be a shapeshifter in order to survive, and I think the role of the musician is really diminished in this day and age. You know, it's a really tough time, getting tougher. And I don't want to sound like a naysayer or a kind of, you know, harbinger of death, or doom, but that's kind of how it is. And I question the future. You know, it's really disheartening when you make something, you spend a lot of time on it, you post it on social media, and it just disappears within seconds. Or albums, you know, anybody that makes an album, I take my hat off to them, because it's so difficult. It takes so much effort to make an album. But I don't know if anybody. I don't know if I'm the best judge of what is new. You know, what is new? What would be a new type of composition? What would be a new type of piano playing? You know, AI is really interesting. I know it's a very hot topic just now, but it is an interesting discussion. You know, it's like, once again, we're talking about the role of the artist.
Mm.
I'm doing a woodcut project just now, and woodcuts, you know, in I think the 17th century, that was sort of considered to be the death of the artist, because the artist wouldn't do it. The artist would design it. They would give it to a technician. The technician would carve it. The drawings or the block would be sold to a publisher. The block would wear out, and then the publisher would get their own technicians to carve it. So where, you know, it's that the artist gets so diluted down that, you know, they thought that was it in the 1700s. They thought that's it, the death of the artist, you know. And now we're looking at the same problem, because, you know, I don't know if you've messed about with it much, but visually, the kind of visual art side of it, I've experimented a lot with, and it's scary. The music stuff I think is really interesting. You know, the AI jukebox compositions that you hear and all that kind of stuff's kind of fascinating. But what does it mean? You know, I heard about a guy who had created an album using AI, created music videos, and then created all his artwork using the AI. And I think he even, the sleeve notes were even AI generated, and he posted it up, and it took him no time at all. And he just did it as an experiment, you know. And apparently, I've not heard of it, apparently it sounds really good.
Well, I have to say I haven't collected any or gathered any experience with AI and music, but with AI and art. What you see in the background is something like that. And in my discussions, there are a lot of discussions on the web going on. I say, well, I don't need to be a good technician. I don't have to know how to deal with a brush to be an artist. The artist is in my brain. The idea is the artistic part. The rest is just handcrafts, and I don't, only technique. And when the technique is taken over by AI, I don't have any problems with that. I can make more art then. I can come true more of my artistic ideas in painting. I don't know the equivalent in music, because I have not yet worked with AI in music. I will, but not yet. I can't say anything about that. But as long as it is only I can compose make great art, a great sonata on the piano, even without being able to play the piano. If it is this one, then AI is great.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely roles, and a lot of the machines that we use now, a lot of these sequencers that you buy, they're almost they're so intelligent, you know, that they'll have a button for randomly generating a beat, for example, and that, you know, what's to say that's not as good as sitting there for 3 days writing a beat or writing a melody. There's I don't know. It's a funny one. It's a strange thing, and you know, I think if you think of all the kind of iconic great artists, most of them were very hands off. You know, they still are. They have other people that do the work. They never touch it. You know, they have teams of people that actually make the work. So yeah, it's really fascinating discussion, and I think it's a healthy discussion. I don't know where we are on the curve. I don't know if we've gone beyond it. I don't know how dangerous it's all getting and how many jobs are under threat, but it's still fascinating. And it's fascinating because it comes back to this idea of how are we interacting? How are we as humans, how do we interact? As humans, how do we interface with technology? How do we interact with technology? It's all really compelling as far as I'm concerned.
Indeed. Two important topics we should at least talk about, or more, but at least these two. One is rhythm. I've listened through your Bandcamp, offers or something like that, and I got the impression that your relation to rhythm in music is kind of ambivalent. It's not always the same. May I ask you to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I think it probably is a little bit confusing. I like rhythm. I'm not a trained musician. Certainly not classically trained. I only really started learning more theory when I picked up the modular synth, and it's quite a weird thing to say, because I think most people think the modular is the ideal instrument for someone that doesn't maybe have musical knowledge or musical theory knowledge or musical know-how. But I found that it was an instrument that made me want to learn theory in order to expand my ability, because the modular it's like you can get simple sounds out of it fairly easily, but to get complex compositions and really interesting dynamics, you really have to apply yourself to it. And I felt like my skills weren't good enough really when I started. So I started learning the piano about 3 or 4 years ago, and I've been kind of trying to get better. Even though I've played music all my life since I was a kid, I never really picked up theory. I just always played by ear. So it's been quite good fun learning that. And I sometimes apply that to rhythm, because I'm learning more about working in, like 5/8, 7/8, these kind of unusual tempos that you don't conventionally you necessarily write songs in. It's quite difficult to hear the one often when you're working in these tempos. So yeah, I am interested in it, and I do like it, and I do like making beats. There's part of me that doesn't like it because I don't want to be like everybody else. And I actually find it, I sort of just, it's hard to sound original, I think, writing beats. But I do love it. And lately I bought a polyend tracker. Do you know this device, the polyend tracker? And I'm addicted to using it. It's just so amazingly addictive to use. You can sit for hours and hours and hours using that thing, and it's just incredible. You don't get the fear, you don't get the fear of, oh, I'm not going to be able to do something. I might not have any ideas. It somehow just pulls it out of you.
Yeah.
And you're not self-conscious at all. You're not over-analytical. There's something about the interface I just find incredible. So I have been getting back into using beats, but a lot of the stuff in the past, for example, using the harmonograph or using the tape device that I built that did a similar thing with kind of gears that were slightly out of sync. And if you use them as a kind of trigger for rhythm, then you're starting to get really off-kilter things going on. And that can be complicated. It can be overcomplicated. So you have to play it down a little bit, but it can still be interesting. And of course, I also really like ambience, ambient music, and I love making that kind of music. So yeah, I find rhythm can be a little bit intrusive when you're making ambient compositions, or you're experimenting with textural sounds, especially with synths. If you're really experimenting with space, then sometimes there's no room for rhythm and repetition. So yeah, I do have let's say an awkward relationship with rhythm, but I do also love it. I'd love to make a big banging techno album. I would love it.
Why not? Yeah, it's techno. Well, I have to say I've never produced something like that, but I tried some techniques, of course, but I thought it gives you more energy than it costs you making text.
So you're saying it gives you more than it takes.
Yes.
How do you mean? How do you mean? So it's like you don't need to put much in order to get a result.
No. That's not. Perhaps it is like that, but that's not what I meant. What I meant is, I had to find when I did, I don't know, 5, 6 pieces, and I've never published something like that, but only for me. After producing them, I felt more refreshed than I have felt before I
Oh,
started.
right, I see. Yeah, definitely. It can be really fun. I think I find sometimes I used to get this a lot when I sang. So if I produced all my own music historically, and I would get really excited by a song that I was working on, and I would think, "Oh, this is great! I think this is the best thing I've done to date." And then about 6 months later, I would just be embarrassed, and I would hate it, and I would just be disgusted with myself. You know, it was an awful feeling. In fact, that's kind of the reason why I stopped singing. But I can sometimes get like that with sort of high energy rhythmic tracks. You know, you can get carried away because it feels great and it sounds great and it's immediate and it's quick and it's satisfying, and you think, Christ, this is incredible, you know, this is going to be great, it's going to be huge, and then you listen back to it and it's just awful, you know, it's awful. You weren't paying attention, you know, you were just carried away. Happens a lot with modular synth as well, you know, like there's a lot of times I've hit record because I think, Jesus, this is incredible, what the hell? And then you listen back a few days later and you just cannot hear what was good about it at all. And not only that, but you recorded about 3 hours of it, so you have to sit and go through the whole thing to try and find the great window, the great moment, and
Yeah.
it doesn't exist.
I know that. I think he knows that. All right. Your studio, the length. I wrote in my email to you, it doesn't look much like a normal studio. I'm perhaps the worst person to write something like that, because my studio doesn't look like anything at all. But anyway, I'd really love to learn more about your studio, how it came to your studio, how is your relation to this studio? Why doesn't it, no, other way around, why does it look like as it looks?
It's a house, which I think most people's studios are these days. But I used to live in Edinburgh, and my rent was quite high. Edinburgh was becoming difficult to live in, so we ended up moving up to the Highlands and bought a school, like a derelict primary schools, like in the UK. That's like where it's like the school you go to first. For the first 7 years, you go to primary school. And it was just a wreck of a building, you know, but it was beautiful. It was this incredible modernist structure, and it was built in 1966. And they used a system called the Derwent system to build it, which just meant it was modular, and it was really easy for them to expand because the 60s was obviously a boom era, I think everywhere, and these rural areas could really quickly expand. So the schools needed to be able to handle the uptake or potential uptake of more students. So, anyways, it was a long process to renovate it. It took about 5 years to renovate. So I wasn't massively active on music throughout that era, but it's basically a kind of quite large modernist style building. For example, where I am right now, the room I'm sitting in was the classroom. So there was only one classroom, a really big space. Through here, through these this sort of bifolding door here, is a nursery. So that's where the young kids would have been schooled. And then it's just a really interesting layout of a building. So I've got a really small studio. My studio is actually, excuse me, it's the smallest room in the whole building. But I don't often use it. What I usually do is run cables into different parts of the building. So like this room, for example, because it's so big, it's got a lovely echo, but it's not got the kind of resonant problems that you get in small spaces. It doesn't have any kind of standing wave issues or anything like that. And you can kind of control the acoustics. So I've done a lot of live recording in here. I recorded a good friend of mine called Catherine Joseph came up. She recorded her album in here, and it was just her and a Fender Rhodes and a couple of microphones all around. And we'd mic'd up her chair. We mic'd up the pedal of the Fender Rhodes. So we got every little creak as she played this beautiful eerie music. And it's just, the room has just got a great sound, I think. So it's kind of inspiring in that sense. The album Loop I recorded in my workshop because it made more sense to be in there. So I was altering things, I was building, I was prototyping, I was changing bits of electronics, and then I wanted to test it. So I had bits of my studio in the workshop, and I would just hit record and test different elements of the machine. So it is a very unconventional studio. I mean, it's starting to look a little bit more conventional in my studio, in my sound studio, but the rest of the building is really unconventional. You know, it doesn't look like a normal studio. You're absolutely right to call that out. But it's a really inspiring place to work. There's a lot of space, and you can do a lot of different things. I've got these beautiful old Tandberg studio monitors. They're incredible speakers. I don't have them in my studio because they're too big, but I have them here. And I've done all kinds of stuff like reamping really, really dry like drum sounds and stuff. If you run it through here and then record the sound of the space, it can sound incredible. And even things like, you know, I've done like stuff with my Korg MS-10 and just played it really loudly through speakers and mic'd it up, and it can sound fantastic in this space. I've recorded on the roof. I've done a few recording sessions up on the roof, and I've recorded in different parts of the building. There's actually loads of live sessions, live video recordings of me on my website playing my tracks. So if anybody's watching this and is interested, they should go and check that out.
Sounds like your studio invited people more to experimentation.
Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah, it's not. I wouldn't come here to create the commercial album of your dreams, you know. But I would definitely come here to experiment and try things out. I've got a lot of instruments that are kind of odd and weird, and you know, I just had somebody up last week, a musician from New York called Glasser. And she's on the same record label as me. I put music out on One Little Independent Records, and she was coming over to the UK to do a photo shoot, and she really wanted to come to the lengths. She was super excited about coming to the lengths, and she's American, but she's got Scottish heritage. So she got the train up from London, and we spent 2 or 3 days making music and making a little video and stuff like that. She had a great time.
Great. What about performing?
Yeah, performance an interesting one, because when you're studio based, and a lot of your music is studio based and experimental, and you know, you're relying on some of these techniques that we've discussed, like layering up 144 tape loops, and you make an album, and then you kind of need to go and promote that album. You're faced with the problem, which I think a lot of people get, where you think, well, how can I authentically represent this sound live without taking, I can't take 144 tape machines on tour with me. So it's really difficult, and I have to spend quite a lot of time on performance, just to kind of think about how you're going to do it logistically. Again, there's not a huge amount of money in touring, I don't think, anyways, at a certain level. So you have to kind of figure out how am I gonna get to the venue with all this equipment. And I love using analog, I love using modular, I love using all that. I love connecting everything and being surrounded by it, but it's not always practical to do that. So yeah, and again, you have to think, how am I going to play multiple parts? How am I going to be engaging? What are people going to see? Am I going to be playing anything, or am I just going to be hitting record and kind of adjusting filters and stuff? It's all valid as far as I'm concerned. You know, I've seen amazing performances with just a laptop, but it has to feel right. It has to feel right to me. So I often take keyboards because I love playing keys. So I think that's an important part of playing live for me, for my set. So quite often, I don't know if I don't know if you play live, or I don't know how you go about it, but usually I have to learn my songs or my tracks after I've recorded them. You know, after the fact that they've been released, I have to then go and learn them, which is quite unusual. It feels counterintuitive, anyways.
Well, there are, I see two major or main aspects in performing. One is simply marketing, and the other is, some people say, I don't agree for me, I don't know, what about you? Some musicians and some artists say we need audience to develop. I don't know. How do you see this?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. I mean, it depends what you want to be, really. I guess there are pop. I know some sort of more pop bands who'll do, you know, they'll try songs out in a small. I know, 'cause, you know, like bigger pop bands, kind of, who maybe play to arenas and festivals. They'll do little tours and try stuff out because they have to consider what their audience wants from them, I guess, and expects from them. But not me, you know. I'm an experimental musician. I can go with the wind, you know. It doesn't really matter to me. I don't care in that respect. And I think it's more respectful to be a little bit more daring and try things out. But one thing on that point though is I really like doing improvised performance, and I would love to do more of that. I wish it was all improvisation, because I think that's when the magic happens, and it doesn't always work. And you know, sometimes it's awful. I've done some horrible gigs improvising, but I've had some amazing moments as well. And I think there's something about the way we understand each other. The audience always is super respectful if you're improvising, because they know you're vulnerable. They know you're taking a risk. And I've always found, I think my favorite gigs have been part improvised or wholly improvised. I think the difficulty for me now is, because I'm releasing albums more, I have to kind of represent those tracks. I feel like I have to represent them.
Yeah.
Not just for me, it's like the label has invested in me. I feel a responsibility to actually present these ideas and these projects to the people that are interested, somewhat faithfully. But you can't beat improvisation. There are musicians that do it. Obviously, people like Scanner and you know, there's a whole bunch of musicians that will just do improvised performances, and that's incredible. You know, I love that. I love it. But I guess for me, I have to try and balance it.
All right. Is there anything you would like to say to my audience? To our audience now.
Our audience. Buy my albums.
Yes, of course. Buy.
I've got a question for you, actually.
Yeah, sure.
So you were saying that you're classically trained. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
What were you trained in? How were you trained?
I studied music theory and composition, and piano. Piano was my main instrument.
And is there room for that in your life now, or have you completely left it behind?
Yes, completely.
And is that because creatively you weren't getting where you wanted to get to, or is it because it takes too much time to be that kind of musician?
No, nothing of this. Nothing of this. Partly it was just, let's say, a mechanical problem, because I had to move a lot in my life. and with a good piano, moving with a good piano, it's frustrating. Then another thing is I grew up with synthesizers, I have to say. The first synthesizers which appeared, ARPs and Moog, I was already making music when they appeared on the market. I'm a grandpa. No, that doesn't matter. I'm quite old, older than I look like. I'm proud of that. I was fascinated by sound, by timbre, by how sound interacts with which. And I spent 2 years, perhaps I lost 2 years, trying to make scales of sound. Yeah, we have rules of how to build melodies. We have rules how to build harmonies and things, but we still don't have rules. Let's say how to change one sound into another. Yeah, we have C major and C minor, but we don't have saw sine triangle major. You know what I mean? Yeah, and something like that. Yeah, and something like that. And so I was drawn more and more into sound design. Nobody knew what sound design is. I didn't know that I was doing sound design. I did it before the term came up, and from that I was more fascinated by things like that, and experimenting with the piano, like Stockhausen did by destroying it. It was not my part of my cup of tea.
Yeah, sure. It's an expensive habit, right?
Yeah, sure. So I was more in direction, and now I'm completely electronic and electric and mechanical as well. I go around and hit with different things, everything that I can get, and record it and stretch it and granular processing and things like that.
I'm always kind of fascinated by this because, as I said, I'm not from that background, and I'm envious of people like you who kind of, I assume you maybe learned it in a younger stage in your life. And it's sort of built into you, and it takes a lot of effort for me to try and learn music. You know, I'm getting a bit older now, and I can't sort of amass the knowledge as quickly as I would like to be able to. But it's not that there's obviously educational value in experimenting with tape decks and all the stuff that I've done in messing about with electronics.
I wouldn't say.
But yeah, I don't know. There's part of me that envies it. I did a residency in New York years ago, like I think it was about 2007. And I don't know why they let me go, actually, because there was 15 musicians from all over the world, and they were all high quality trained musicians, but very experimental, very kind of non-conventional, let's say. And then me, and I was the non-musician, you know, and that was actually how I was termed, the non-musician, which I thought I was incredibly insulted at first, but then I realized that was just a fairly common term for somebody that hasn't trained in music. But it was a real education, because let's say there were 3 former flautists. There seems to be a lot of people that give up the flute. And there was one guy called Ricardo Arias who played the balloons. That was his instrument. So he would just inflate balloons, and he was part of he was from Colombia, but he was part of the New York avant-garde sort of experimental music scene, improvised. And he says that he told me there's an amazing thirst for improvisation in music in New York, because nobody's got time to rehearse. Because of the pace of the city, nobody rehearses, nobody's got time to compose, but people want to have music in their lives. So there are a lot of people who are very tolerant of very challenging improvised music, because everybody's kind of in the same boat, you know. Nobody has time to rehearse these very technical pieces.
Okay, you are right in one aspect, at least in one aspect, that you say some you suck in some things, some knowledge, and use it without even knowing that you're using it. That's true. But I don't think that it's necessarily an advantage to be educated in a classical way, because there are two problems or two difficulties which everyone has, coming from this matter. The first one is you automatically fall into schemes, into stereotypes, and want to make them better, but there are still these stereotypes. Is one thing, and then when you realize, hey, what I'm doing is nothing else than a bad copy of Mozart or Beethoven or Haydn or something like that, or even of Stockhausen, to take some modern causes, nothing else. Then you, let's say, try to break out, but you don't have any experience of bringing yourself into your music. Yeah, you are trained for rules and things like that. Yeah, and so you suddenly you open a door into a room. You try to open a door and step out into a room, into a field, into a universe which is completely unknown to you, and then what then happens, it's not only, I'm not only talking about me some 30 years ago, what then happens is you try to apply these old rules to this new universe, and it's always ending in a catastrophe. So it's not always not in all aspects an advantage to be classically trained.
Yeah. Do you find it useful when patching with a modular synth, for example?
Sure. Not only I have learned thousands of things, at least the same amount of things than at university about music, when I started working consequently and disciplined with modular synths.
Yeah. It's really interesting, the whole modular synth thing. I do think that it's somewhat dismissed. I have heard people say that it's the instrument for people that don't play music, and it's kind of like I couldn't disagree more. I think it takes so much discipline and determination and skill to be able to make modular synth sound great. And see, when you hear it done really well, it's incredible. There's so much to it, And if you have any kind of knowledge of how complicated it can be and how difficult it can be to get variation and dynamic and expression out of a modular synth, when you hear it done well, it's just incredible.
I think composing, and I talk about composing, not only about improvising, but really composing a piece for modular synth needs completely different kind of knowledge, but not less kind of knowledge than in classical world. It's completely different what you have to know and you have to learn.
But it's fascinating. It's kind of like the thing that drew me to modular initially was that it's an open network. I love the idea that you can get into it, you can get inside the machine. It's really easy to connect once you realize that all you're doing is you're controlling voltage, and you think, well, you can almost plug anything into a modular. You can make anything switch. You can make anything oscillate. You can make anything repeat and cycle. It becomes super, super fascinating.
Yeah, I agree completely. That's true. And what's nice, especially not only, but for younger people, is that there is, on the software side, there are great what is it called, emulations of modular synths to learn these techniques without having to spend thousands of dollars or crowns.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the great barrier to entry, isn't it? It's the expense of it, which is. It's a shame that it is so expensive, but I also understand that, anybody that's tried to build an instrument like I have, the amount of thought and effort that goes into to creating something is insane. So I think it's justifiable, but yeah, you're right. It is kind of a off-putting thing. It also puts me off touring with my modular system a little bit as well, because it has this value, this monetary real world value to it. So, it can be a little bit off-putting taking it on the road.
Yeah, indeed. I love to teach using this VCV Rec software.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's for teaching. It's wonderful. Everybody can have it, and I can send examples and exercises out to my students, and they can do this. That's really great. Sorry.
Sorry, no, you go. No, you go.
Oh, thank you. One nice, no, not nice, but perhaps funny experience. I once made a simple mixer module, do it yourself. I made it on the breadboard at first. Everything worked great. No, it was not a mixer. It was a clock generator, and everything worked. And then I translated this circuit to PCB, and nothing worked. And until now, I could not find the difference.
So have you found out what the problem was then?
No, I haven't. It's still over there in my electronic corner. I just haven't got the time to go deep into it.
That's my life. You're basically describing my life.
Yes.
It works on breadboard, and then as soon as you make a circuit, it doesn't work. That happens to me all the time.
And there isn't. Yeah.
Do you use Pure Data or Max? Have you ever experimented with Max MSP and Pure Data?
Pure Data, yeah. PD.
Yeah, I've used it a little bit. I used it for a couple of installations, and I'm just getting into Max now. I have experimented with Max in the past, but I'm getting more and more into it now.
It's great.
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, I always say Pure Data is a really great way. If I was going to recommend somebody to learn about modular synthesis who didn't have money to be able to get into it, I would say just go and download Pure Data, and it'll give you all the building blocks you need to then go and learn modular, and you won't have spent a penny,
Yeah, great. All right, Lomond, thank you.
Thank you.
Very inspiring talk. I thank you for that.
Same. Thank you. Very inspiring discussion and interview. So thank you.
And I can imagine that we will meet at a later time.
Hope so.
With more interesting topics. So see you. Just some technical things. Enjoy your weekend.
All right, Rolf. You too, man. Take care.